Well, I've got 5 o'clock, so I think I'll get started. Thank you for coming. As the slide says, my name is M.James, and I'm an associate professor of applied linguistics at Arizona State University. Today I'll talk for about 30 minutes about one of the recent studies that I've carried out, and we'll have some time then for questions. I don't have a handout, but I'm going to post these slides and an audio recording of this presentation on my website. So please feel free to visit and download that if you like. I'll put this website address up again at the end of the presentation. Okay, so basically this study examines whether teaching can help to promote EFL students' self-efficacy. Self-efficacy is a widely studied psychological construct that refers to a person's beliefs about her or his own abilities. This could involve a person's beliefs about her or his own abilities in all sorts of areas. For example, the ability to drive a car, the ability to stick to a diet or exercise plan, the ability to raise children, or the ability to do well at school. And when we're talking about self-efficacy of EFL students, we're talking about these students' beliefs about their own ability to use English. For example, their ability to speak in English, to understand when listening to or reading English, or to write in English. In other words, a student with strong self-efficacy believes she or he can use English effectively, while a student with weak self-efficacy has doubts about her or his ability to use English. So that's what self-efficacy is, and it's a topic worth understanding and taking a close look at in EFL education and TESOL more broadly, I would argue, because of the impact that self-efficacy has on people's behavior. Research shows that this impact can happen in a variety of ways. For example, an EFL student who believes that she is capable of using English is likely to gravitate towards opportunities to use English, to work hard when using English, to continue using English when situations become difficult, and to feel positive about using English. And this impact can show up in measurable ways, like significantly improved performance on tests and higher course grades. So from this angle, trying to promote students' self-efficacy is a worthwhile goal for EFL teachers. Now, EFL teachers might approach this in various ways, but research outside second language education suggests that the most effective way for self-efficacy to develop is through first-hand experiences of success. For example, students' self-efficacy might increase because they feel successful when they are trying to understand lectures and work out problems, or because they think they did well on assignments and they think the grades they got on tests and report cards are good. So with this in mind, an EFL teacher could try to provide opportunities for students to experience success. And a popular teaching tool that looks like it might be particularly well suited to doing this is tasks. Tasks are language teaching activities that require students to use the language meaningfully to achieve a communicative goal. For example, a task might involve having one student describe famous places without naming them, so that a second student can listen and try to guess the places. And another task might involve having one student describe a route on a map, so a second student can listen and try to draw that route on a blank map. What's particularly important from a self-efficacy perspective is that tasks involve some kind of outcome that students can use to gauge their own ability to communicate successfully. In the first example task that I just described, with one student describing famous places, the outcome would be the second student's guess of which famous place is being described. And in the other example task, which involves one student describing a route on a map, the outcome would be the route that the second student draws on the blank map. These outcomes are concrete demonstrations of the student's second language abilities. And as a result, tasks have potential to show to students in a relatively explicit way that they can communicate successfully when speaking their second language. This kind of success can, in turn, have a positive impact on self-efficacy. And here's where we see a gap in research. A large body of scholarly work has examined the use of tasks in second language education and has pointed to a variety of possible benefits. But research has not yet examined the influence of tasks on students' self-efficacy. So we don't yet know if tasks really are well suited to promoting EFL students' self-efficacy. And that's what the study that I'm describing today was meant to investigate. So let's take a look now at those details. So with that background in mind, I developed a study to answer the following research question. Can EFL students' self-efficacy to speak English communicatively be increased through task-based speaking practice? To answer this question, I carried out an experimental study in fall 2015 with students in EFL classes at a public high school in a city in South Korea. I chose this school for practical reasons, because I had helpful contacts there, but also because of the widespread interest in South Korea in English education, and because the national curriculum for English education has a set of main goals that includes fostering students' confidence in English, and that's linked to self-efficacy. From those angles, this context seemed a good match for a study of English teaching methodology and students' self-efficacy. And on this slide is some background information about the students who participated in this study. EFL students at this school are typical of many South Korean high school English students in several ways. First, this school is part of a large category of general academic schools, and its English classes follow a national curriculum for English education, focusing mainly on university entrance exam preparation. Also, the school has an admission system that involves a computer lottery, like many urban high schools in South Korea. Finally, on a national achievement test in fall 2015, English scores for the school's first-year students were almost identical to the national average. As for numbers, a total of 83 students completed all phases of data collection. Of these 83 students, 54% were female and 46% were male. Ages ranged from 15 to 18 years, with an average of just over 17. And most reported being in their first year or second year of their high school studies. The main tool for data collection was a questionnaire that I created for the study. This questionnaire had 13 items that dealt with self-efficacy to speak English communicatively. And you can see about half of them here on this slide. I didn't put them all up here because the font was too small, but this gives an idea of the questionnaire format and content. So the format of each item was a statement describing an ability, like, I can speak English with grammar that is correct enough for a listener to understand me, followed by an 11-point rating scale going from 0% to 100% in increments of 10. I used this format because it has been recommended by self-efficacy researchers outside second language education, and it has been used successfully in some other studies of second language students' self-efficacy. And to figure out what abilities the statements should describe, I took a practical approach, looking through the South Korean English education curriculum for speaking-related abilities that students were meant to develop. Abilities that I found in the curriculum and then used as the basis for these questionnaire items included being able to speak with linguistic accuracy, for example, using structures from a grammar list and a vocabulary list, being able to speak to perform particular functions, including giving factual information, telling a story, expressing attitudes and emotions, things like this. Third, being able to speak in particular generic situations, like giving a presentation and participating in a conversation. And last, being able to speak to communicate with particular people, like classmates and teachers in English classes, and with people from outside school, for example, visitors from other countries. And then, after I identified those abilities, speaking-related abilities in the curriculum, I turned those abilities into items for the questionnaire, like the ones you see on this slide. And the final step in preparing the questionnaire was having it translated into Korean. I asked a fluent speaker of Korean and English to translate my English draft of the questionnaire into Korean, and then I asked a different fluent speaker of Korean and English to do a back translation from Korean back into English, so I could check that against the original English draft. And once data collection was finished, I was able to take a look at the quality of the questionnaire from a statistical angle by measuring its internal consistency. I calculated Cronbach's alpha for the 13 self-efficacy items, and it ended up being 0.98, which is considered high. So from this angle, the quality of the questionnaire was good. Besides the questionnaire, I also had to design task-based speaking practice for the students to do. In this design, practicality was an important consideration because it wasn't possible to schedule extracurricular in-person meetings for the students to do activities. So I had to design activities that students could complete on their own time independently. So based on several pilot studies that I had done previously, and on information that I got from the school about what students might be able to handle, I decided to have the students do a total of 12 tasks spread over approximately 1 month. And each task would take about 10 minutes to complete. Also, it made most sense that the tasks would be done online so students would have scheduling flexibility. Besides practicality, it was also important that the task-based speaking practice would have potential to show students explicitly that they can communicate successfully when speaking English, since that was the feature of tasks that was of most interest in this study. So I decided the best way to do this was to design tasks similar to information gap tasks that I had used in the past, ones that involve describing pictures. So for each of the 12 tasks for this study, students were provided with a collection of pictures, for example, a collection of different faces. And they were asked to make a 1-minute recording of her or himself speaking to describe as many of the pictures as possible in a sequence of her or his choice, and to upload the recording. I could then listen to the recording and try to figure out the sequence the student had chosen to describe the pictures. And then I could email the sequence back to the student as feedback. So with this design, there is an outcome. The outcome is the sequence that I guessed the student had chosen to describe the pictures, and that I would email back to the student. And this outcome would demonstrate to the student how successfully she or he had been able to communicate in English. Also, to help make the task-based speaking practice an opportunity to experience success, I built repetition into the sequence of tasks. Instead of each of the 12 tasks having a different collection of pictures for students to describe, I used a total of 4 collections of pictures, each one 3 times. So for example, in the total sequence of 12 tasks, tasks 1, 5, and 9 involved the same collection of faces for the students to describe. This way, students would have a good chance to see their performance improve, and therefore to experience success. So that describes the research materials that I created, the self-efficacy questionnaire and the task-based speaking practice. As for the research procedure, the questionnaire and the activities were arranged as a course in an online learning management system, Blackboard. And when students enrolled in this course, they were immediately placed into one of 3 groups. Group 1 would do the task-based speaking practice. Group 2 would do speaking practice that was similar to the task-based speaking practice in scope and design. In other words, they would do a sequence of 12 activities, about 10 minutes each, that involved describing a collection of pictures in a 1-minute recording. But instead of describing the pictures in a sequence of their own choosing and receiving an email from me telling them what sequence I thought they had described, Group 2 would describe the pictures in the provided sequence and then receive an email from me telling them what their speaking rate was in the recording. In this way, Group 2's speaking practice was not task-based. The feedback these Group 2 students received, which was their speaking rate in the recording, for example, 100 words per minute or 110 words per minute, something like that, it might indicate to them how quickly they could speak, but it wouldn't help them to gauge their own ability to actually communicate. And the third group, Group 3, would not do any speaking practice at all. The way that I organized students into these groups was random, in that it was based on the order in which they enrolled in the Blackboard course. So the first student to enroll was placed in Group 1, the second student into Group 2, third student Group 3, fourth student Group 1, and it repeated that way. And the last logistical thing to work out was the schedule of the research activities. For Group 1, that was the group doing task-based speaking practice. And for Group 2, that was the group doing non-task-based speaking practice. The schedule was identical. involving the first administration of the self-efficacy questionnaire. I'll call that the pre-questionnaire. Then 12 speaking practice activities, one every other day over about 4 weeks. And then the second administration of the self-efficacy questionnaire, and I'll call that the post-questionnaire. And for group 3, the group that did no speaking practice at all, the schedule was different. They completed the pre-questionnaire, then approximately 4 weeks later, the post-questionnaire, without any activities between those two administrations of the questionnaire. So after following that procedure, I had a set of data that I was able to analyze to try to answer the research question. So here's a general summary of the pre-questionnaire and post-questionnaire data. And on this table, you can see the 3 groups across the top. Group number 1, task-based speaking practice. Group 2, non-task-based speaking practice. Group 3, no speaking practice. For each of those 3 groups, you can see scores for the pre-questionnaire and scores for the post-questionnaire. Going across the rows, you can see scores for each of the 13 items in the questionnaire. And those are the individual items. And at the very bottom, you can see the average score for across all the items. And looking just at the pre-questionnaire data, which is highlighted here, as the average scores in the bottom row of the table show, self-efficacy at the beginning of the study was moderate, at 46.8 for group 1, 52.9 for group 2, and 54.3 for group 3. And remember that these scores are on a scale of 0 to 100. So right in the middle of the scale. So for these students collectively, at the start of the study, there was plenty of room for self-efficacy to increase. So then, to look more closely at these data, I ran a few statistical tests. First, I looked to see if these differences between the 3 groups at the beginning of the study on the pre-questionnaire were statistically significant. I compared pre-questionnaire scores for the 3 groups using a Kruskal-Wallis test, and results showed that the scores did not differ significantly between the 3 groups. In other words, as of the beginning of the study, self-efficacy was at a similar level across the 3 groups. I then looked to see if there were any significant changes in self-efficacy from the pre-questionnaire to the post-questionnaire. And that's what's highlighted here, pre-questionnaire to post-questionnaire scores for each of the 3 groups. So for each of the 3 groups, I examined the difference between pre-questionnaire and post-questionnaire scores using a Wilcoxon signed rank test. Results showed that for groups 1 and 2, there were significant increases from pre-questionnaire scores to post-questionnaire scores. And for group 3, there was no significant change. And finally, I looked to see if there were any significant differences between the groups in terms of the amount of change in self-efficacy. My main interest here was in figuring out how the increase for group 1 compared to the increase for group 2. And that's what's highlighted here. Those are the amounts of increase in self-efficacy. To do this, I examined the amount of change in self-efficacy using a Kruskal-Wallis test, and results showed that there was no significant difference between group 1 and group 2. In other words, the increase in self-efficacy was similar for these 2 groups. So those were the results of the study. And we can look now at how these results help shed light on the relationship between EFL teaching and students' self-efficacy. As the first bullet here says, the results show that task-based speaking practice can help EFL students to develop self-efficacy to speak English. More specifically, for students in group 1, which was the group that did task-based speaking practice, there was a significant increase in self-efficacy. While for students in group 3, which was the group that did only the pre and post questionnaires and no speaking practice in between, there was no such increase. And this result is valuable because it helps to fill an important gap in research. There's a large body of scholarly work that has examined the use of tasks in second language education, and a lot of support for the use of tasks has come out of this work. But none of this work has looked at the influence of tasks on students' self-efficacy. And that's an angle worth looking at because of the positive impact that high levels of self-efficacy can have. So the results here are a useful addition to the body of scholarly work on the use of tasks in EFL education. Now, moving to the second bullet, the results also show that EFL teaching does not have to be task-based in order to help students develop self-efficacy. More specifically, for students in Group 2, which was the group that did non-task-based speaking practice, there was a significant increase in self-efficacy, similar to the increase for Group 1. And that was the group that did the task-based speaking practice. This result seems surprising because in literature on self-efficacy, it has been suggested that to develop self-efficacy for a particular activity, people benefit from experiences of success with similar activities. So, for example, to develop self-efficacy for driving, people benefit from experiences of success actually driving. And to develop self-efficacy for losing weight, people benefit from experiences of success actually losing weight. From this angle, we might expect that to increase a student's self-efficacy to use English to communicate, activities should involve actually using English to communicate. That's what the tasks in this study were meant to provide. Experience actually using English to communicate. But the results suggest that students' self-efficacy can increase even without that kind of experience. In other words, English learning activities that do not involve speaking English communicatively can still have a positive influence on students' self-efficacy. From this angle, while tasks can help EFL students to develop self-efficacy to speak English, tasks may not be especially well suited for this, more than other kinds of activities. And moving on to the third bullet, a further point can be made about the result that task-based and non-task-based speaking practice had a similar influence on the student's self-efficacy. Since this result was surprising, I looked for similarities between these types of practice that might help to explain. One possibility is that both types of speaking practice included outcomes that were indicators of success. Students who did task-based speaking practice received emails from me telling them what sequence I thought they had described a collection of pictures. And this was an indicator of the student's success at communicating. On the other hand, students who did the non-task-based speaking practice received emails from me telling them their per-minute speaking rate. And this was an indicator of their success at speaking fluently. So it's possible that it's the experience of success in general, rather than the specific kind of success, that's important for helping students to develop self-efficacy. In other words, it may not be necessary for students to do tasks, but it may be beneficial for whatever activities students do to have some kind of outcome that helps the students to gauge some aspect of their English ability. For example, their communicative success, or their speaking fluency, or something else. So that's a summary of the main results, and we can move on now to look at these results from the perspective of implications for teaching. First, to facilitate students' self-efficacy to speak English communicatively, providing students with task-based speaking practice like that used in this study is an option. This option should be an accessible one for teachers, given that tasks are widely used in and suitable for a broad range of teaching contexts. Also, this option can be relatively efficient. The task-based speaking practice in this study totaled between 2 and 3 hours over about 4 weeks of a school term. In some earlier studies, efforts to increase second language students' self-efficacy involved much more time. For example, by sending students on study abroad programs that ranged from 5 to 15 weeks long. In comparison, a few hours of task-based speaking practice would require much less in the way of resources. And in EFL teaching contexts where there's limited access to English speakers outside class, or where there is limited flexibility in the curriculum, a relatively efficient option for helping students to increase self-efficacy could be of value. And second, tasks are not the only way that teachers can facilitate students' self-efficacy to speak English communicatively. And this is good news in the sense that EFL teaching can include a wide range of other kinds of activities. For example, in some contexts, in addition to communication-focused activities, teachers may also make use of fluency-focused speaking activities, like having students create audio journals or voice blogs, or having students shadow recordings of other people speaking, or have students give short speeches repetitively in decreasing amounts of time, what we sometimes call a 4-3-2 activity. These activities would be similar to the non-task-based speaking practice that students in Group 2 did in my study. And while such speaking activities may not be communicative, it's possible that benefits would still include increased self-efficacy. Given the diversity of contexts in EFL education, it's likely helpful to teachers that different kinds of activities can be used to achieve the goal of developing students' self-efficacy. And finally, this study has limitations that point to directions for future research. Some limitations are related to the choice of context and participants in this study. For example, these participants were students from one South Korean high school. So whether similar results would be found with students in other EFL education contexts, like at different institutions, or with students of different ages, ability levels, different first languages, this is uncertain. A related point is that the self-efficacy questionnaire used in this study was developed by drawing on the South Korean national curriculum for English education. So the relevance of these results in other EFL education contexts depends on how well this questionnaire reflects local curricula in those other contexts. In addition, since this research was conducted outside the students' high school courses, the students who completed all of the data collection activities were likely students with relatively high levels of motivation to learn English, who believed they could spare time from their high school coursework, and whose parents supported them spending time on English learning activities not linked directly to their high school grades. Those are factors that could be related to self-efficacy. So research involving students without these characteristics would be worthwhile. And besides those limitations related to the choice of context and participants, other limitations are related to structural aspects of the research design, and that's the second main bullet here. First, increases in self-efficacy were observed only immediately after participants had finished the 4 weeks of speaking practice. So whether these increases were durable over time is unknown. Second, while there is good reason to think that the increases in self-efficacy here are related to the outcomes that indicated to students how successful they had been in their speaking activities, there was no comparison group in this study that did speaking practice but without such outcomes. Third, this study looked at task-based and non-task-based speaking practice, but EFL teaching can include a much wider range of techniques. So these are things that could be explored with different research designs in future studies of this topic. So to wrap up, these are some of the important limitations of this study and its findings. But despite these limitations, this study does make useful contributions to the body of scholarly work on the influence of EFL teaching on students' self-efficacy, pointing in worthwhile directions for teaching and for future research. And with that in mind, I think we'll stop here, and I'm happy to answer any questions if there are any. Thank you.